Welcome back to another episode of
Just
a Squirrel
looking for a nut,
trying to get out of
this rut. Oh my God, that was the best thing. That was the best one ever. We almost got success.
Yes.
Oleg.
Striving and seeking success. We just achieved elements of that.
Exactly. And it feels so good. Oleg, let me tell you a story. As you know, for nearly 20 years, I worked as an attorney with the city of New York. And then I left my job. I didn't have another one. And it took me a long time to figure out exactly who I was, where I was going, and what I wanted to do next. I was without another job for over a year. One day during that period, I went to an event that my husband held. It was a screening of a movie that he'd filmed, and someone that I used to date many years before him was there. And that individual came up to me and he said, "Scott, what are you doing these days?" And I said, "Oh, I am transitioning between jobs. I'm looking at different options in my career. I'm da-da-da-da." And he looked at me and he said, "Scott, but what exactly are you doing?"
Yeah.
And I tried to give another BS answer. And he said, "Scott, I really would like you to tell me what exactly you are doing for your career." And I had none. I felt like a total failure. It was one more humiliation that I endured during a year that was full of a lot of difficulty and humiliation. I eventually, as you know, got another job. It was a great job. However, it took me a long time to overcome the sense of failure that incident in that movie theater highlighted to me. Eventually, I understood that I can't really care about whether other people feel I am successful or not. And I certainly cannot rely on them for my own internal self-assessments.
Mm-hmm.
But it begs the question, why did I care so much about being successful? What are your thoughts hearing that?
I think for me, so I've experienced similar things throughout my life where I was asked that question of what do you do, and been in situations where I wasn't able to articulate it as clearly as I'm able to do it today. And in that moment, I think what I've realized, and I went through the same exact thing, in not being able to say it in that one sentence or two sentences even, what it is that I do and how it is that I make a living. I found myself going down this rabbit hole, perceiving my whole life and everything that I was doing as a form of failure. And I as you were sharing that, the first thing that came to mind is acceptance. Wanting to be accepted, wanting to fit in, not wanting to be the quote unquote outlier in that situation, where if someone doesn't understand it, I think I shared this with you, and I might have shared this with Casey as well on another episode that we had previously, where I was describing to one of my mentors from high school when I saw him within the past couple of years, and he asked me the same question. How do you make a living? What do you do? What's your job? And I described to him what I was doing through overcoming odds, and he didn't understand that. And it was in that moment I realized that I had a choice. I either can look at it as I failed to either describe to him what I was doing, or he just doesn't have a reference point. Because not everyone is familiar with the concepts that you and I are doing and engaged in every single day. And even if you use other points of reference, such as Oprah Winfrey, Tony Robbins, I've also realized that not everyone even knows those names. So it becomes a little bit of a challenge to describe what it is that you do, especially when it comes to early stages of it. And so what I started to do within my own journey within these past couple of years is I really started to reframe what success looks like for me. And instead of waiting for that final destination, so to speak, or a mile marker in order for me to understand that I'm successful, I just started to look at it as every day I get to get up, and every day when I get to do the things that I'm doing, that is what makes me successful. So I no longer look at it as this final thing that I have to hit. You know, when you're writing a book, you just finished the book. You can still tell yourself that you're successful in the process or throughout the process of writing that book. It's not solely based on the ability to hold that final version. And that was, I think, a big shift for me, is understanding that success can be acquired throughout the journey and not necessarily at that quote unquote final destination.
What makes the journey that you are on, though, something that is successful versus something that is a neutrality, or something that is a failure?
Well, so I think it's interesting that you even bring that up, because I think success and failure go hand in hand.
What do you mean?
What I mean by that is I think components of success are dependent on moments of failure. So situations where I quote unquote failed, and that is, for me, I remember however many years ago, I used to look at failure through a very different lens than the way that I look at it now. I used to look at failure as something to avoid. I used to look at failure as literally the worst thing that could happen to anyone. And then I started to realize that in part of achieving some elements of success, failure is a necessary component of it. Having the ability to get back up after making a mistake or an error, that's what I view as failure, and then continuing to keep going. Now, I also think that success, in my opinion, and I'll be curious to hear your perspective, I think in a way it's almost like completing the cycle of life, so to speak. You're born, you live, and you die. It's a very simplified version of life, but I think you and the listeners get the point here. Success is, I think, it's a similar thing. You know, because I was thinking about this before this conversation. It's that I seek success in order to get mastery, in order to gain completion of something. You don't say I seek work in progress, right? Because that's
I don't. I have to admit, no. It's something to get through, something to have end,
something to have an end point. So that way you can start the next journey, if there is a next journey beyond that. So I think success, it is kind of that completion to a cycle of life, maybe to a project or whatever it is that I'm doing. The challenge that I've experienced with that word in general is that it took me a while to really understand what it means to have a level of success. I remember when I was first starting much of this work, the way that I was taught success was, it was about the fancy cars, the $1 million mansions, and make more money than you could ever dream of. That was the version of success that was put in front of me. Now, after a while, I started to realize that that doesn't have to be the ultimate version. For me, it became more important. I developed greater importance around the concept of who I become along the journey, rather than any particular result that I achieve. And that was a big shift. Like once that shifted, I think my whole definition of success shifted completely. And so, you know, do I still seek certain goals and milestones and accomplishments? Yes. And the reason why is because I think having some goals or moving targets, it's important. It's important for me. It gives me something to strive for. But when I achieve it, I don't look at it as like my life is complete.
How do you know if you've been a failure?
It's a really good question. So I don't look at things as failure. And maybe you can give me some examples, you know, throughout your own experience that can illustrate what failure looks like. I'm also look at moments of quote unquote failure as mistakes or just errors. So if I'm trying to reach out to someone, or for example, when someone asks me the question of what do you do for a living or what do you do? And if I'm not able to meet their expectations when it comes to an answer, I don't look at that as failure. I look at that as my ability or inability to communicate clearly what it is that I do in 1 to 2 words or a full sentence. So that just gives me a chance to kind of get back up and shift the message. So I don't really look at it as a failure. I more so just look at it that I might have made a mistake in my word choice or in really understanding where the other person is coming from. They might have, like I said, they might have no reference point of what personal development even is. So taking a step back, helping them understand what that looks like, and then finding common ground as far as people that they might be familiar with, and then reference myself to them in order to help that person understand it.
Joan Crawford was a famous movie actress that had her height in the 40s and the 50s. I think she was also popular in the 30s too. Mm-hmm. And she adopted 4 children. Joan Crawford was working as a headlining actress until just a few years before she died of cancer, but she also was quite elderly at that point. And she lived in a glamorous penthouse here in New York City. She probably had houses other places. She is and always will be a Hollywood legend. She was dripping in jewels. She never had any, once she became a successful actress, which was the overwhelming majority of her life, she never had any material wants at all. In fact, she was quite obviously, for the overwhelming part of her life, part of the 1%, if not even probably part of the 0.1%. As you and everyone else watching this may know, 2 of her children, her 2 oldest, hated her. She had a son that she didn't speak to for the entire last 20, 30 years of her life. She had a daughter who wrote a best-selling book about her called Mommy Dearest that became a movie. And that movie is one of the most successful, memorable movies of the 80s. And everyone knows it. You might not know anything else about any movie from the 1970s or 80s, but you know Mommy Dearest, and you know what it means, and you know that your mama will get mad if you call her Mommy Dearest. I call my mama Mommy Dearest. One time she slapped me across the face. She certainly knew. Joan Crawford died alone. No one came. She lost all of her friends. Her 2 oldest children were antagonized by her. I don't know what happened with the other 2. She might have been a success. She might have been a failure. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I think it's a matter of perception. I mean, I think I have wondered about this for a while, living up to certain expectations that are created by family members, especially parents. You know, you look at people like that who have become, I mean, literally icons, cultural icons. That's a very high standard to live up to as an individual, especially as a child, considering that your abilities may not be the same as the ones of your parents. So I could see how it could be challenging to define your own version of success and live up to it when someone else has lived up to such a different version of it. Yeah. Now, I also think that I can't relate because I haven't had parents like that who have done things like that, like New York Times bestsellers or movies or anything like that. But I can only imagine what it would be like to constantly have that version that's always in front of you. And it would be also interesting to see what is the influence the other way around. What were the things that the kids were told from the parents' perspective? as far as, do you have to live up to that same version? And if not, can you truly be anyone else or anything that you wish for? And I think that's one of the challenges that I notice as well when it comes to just the society I live in. And I don't know if you experienced this, Scott, but seeing people within the industries that you might be working in, whether it's a speaker or whoever, and that constant comparison that I have to be like this person. And if I don't get there, therefore what I'm doing is not meaningful. Is everyone meant to impact 1 billion people? I don't know. Maybe not. Is it okay to only impact one? Is it okay to only impact a neighborhood? I think it is.
But what if you impact people and it's negative? Or what if you feel like you have lived your life and you've never impacted anyone or anyone in a positive way? Or what if you're a person...
Also possible.
Yeah, like there's an author named Dean R. Koontz who writes horror books. He's kind of allegedly a poor man Stephen King. And I read an interview with him, and he apparently had a very abusive father who was super narcissistic and a jerk to everyone who came into his orbit. And when his father died, no one went to the funeral. Maybe he and his wife went in to just look around, and then they just turned around and left, basically. It was some story like that. And so the question is, was that father a failure? Was that father successful? Should the father maybe should we all be caring about being successful? You know, I hear all the time, I shouldn't care about what that guy thought about me. You shouldn't care what anyone else thinks. You have to find success and define success on your own terms. But maybe if we didn't have that mentality, maybe if we actually gave a darn about whether we would be successful, if we were all successful, then maybe our society, maybe the world that we live in would be better. What if every single person felt, I have got to be a success? Imagine the wealth that could be created, the innovations that can happen. Imagine if we said everyone has to be a successful parent. And we define being a successful parent as someone who has their children wanting to be at their funeral. Imagine the sort of parenting there might be in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think there's value in being able to look at other people and the quote unquote success that they achieve within their lives, because not necessarily, for example, I don't look at people like that and I think that, oh, I got to achieve that same exact thing that they've done. But more so, I look at their journey and I look at the skills that they gained along the way. I look at what they did and what they continue to do during times when everything went south. How did they respond to a challenge that was right in front of them? So in looking at people like that, I more so look at inspiration. I try and pick up some tools as well. I mean, how were they able to persevere? What does resilience look like in their lives? But I do agree with you. I think if everyone, and maybe the challenging part about answering that question of what you just brought up is maybe everyone does have their own version of success. And some, I don't know, some go after it, others maybe not with the same intensity, but maybe everyone does try and go after it to a degree. It just happens to be so different because, for example, my energy and my actions may not be the same as your energy and your actions. But does that make one better than the other?
Well, depending on what the outcomes are, maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe how those ways impact others. If my way is all abrasive, let's say you and I are trying to do the same thing, but my way is all abrasive and it's pushing people off and it's undermining the cause that I'm trying to further, or it's just purely selfish, or if it actually destroys people's lives or hurts their feelings, and you're being calm and intentional and respectful and polite and not turning everybody into a hater.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I could see that. I could see how I think it's double-edged sword. Like I could see how it could have the positive impact, but it could also have the negative impact. But I'm also curious to a degree when it comes to being able to go after whatever success looks like in one's life, why is it that appears that some either embrace it and others are afraid of it?
I'm going to be honest with you.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to be vulnerable, because that's what we're all about here. I strive very hard to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone that will sacrifice a lot to pursue what I view as success. I will admit what I view as success has changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, perhaps it's my age and stage in life, but more likely it's probably personality, disposition, things that happened when I was growing up, or things that situations I've been in different points in my professional life, which we've discussed before. People haven't always believed in me. I have been very driven to succeed on the terms that I set forth. And I am very driven not to fail. And it pushes me. It gives me motivation. It keeps me going. I don't want to leave this world feeling like I had no impact, or that I was a waste of space, or that I didn't achieve everything that I could have, or at least do my best to try. Is that something that reflects a misplaced mindset on my part? Is that something I should write down action items and seek to resolve?
What does success look like for you?
You weren't supposed to ask me that question. It's a hard one. Success to me means, and this is a hard one to conceptualize because it is a little bit not airy-fairy, but it is not something with key performance metrics or indicators that I could put down on a graph and just say, okay, I achieved it or not. For me, success for the past year and a half has meant maximizing and optimizing my skills and talents in the service of the cosmos, whatever tiny way it might be. Mm-hmm. I personally want and believe that I'm capable of just about anything when I am really working hard and tapping into the purpose that I am put here for and using the skills that I have. I'm not successful either in outcome or in the journey, for instance, if I have decided to be the ultimate paper pusher in an accounting firm. Mm-hmm. Not because there's anything wrong with being a paper pusher in an accounting firm. In fact, those people probably have secured and saved more financial futures and contributed more to the prosperity of society than anyone. But it's not optimizing my skills. When I have ultimately, there have been times, and I've changed a lot. I used to, especially in my years working for government, view success as having certain financial outcomes or completion of certain projects or a desk in an office of a certain type, or even better, a title that I could throw around. And those, one would argue, represented a measure of professional success. Mm-hmm. I personally, though, have come, and I do mean this sincerely, I'm not just saying this as a matter of self-help, do not believe that I was successful because who and what I was inside was so destroyed by it that I actually consider it, except by the most superficial means or by the most superficial definitions, I consider myself a failure there. I do. Mm-hmm. I consider myself fully successful when I am completing the mission that I'm on this planet for. And all I was doing those years, maybe I'll look back, and sometimes I do look back, and I think it's possible that I was preparing for that mission. And so therefore I wasn't the failure that on other days I suppose myself to be. But then there are days when I say, that was a failure. Now really connected to my mission, really connected to my future, really connected to what we've talked about before on the show as my own perceived destiny. I feel like if I'm not a success now, I am setting myself up for success. And I certainly feel different inside because of it.
Do you
Can you
feel
relate?
like,
Oh, go ahead.
and I will respond after. Do you feel like you're able to fully step into that version of success right now? Or is there something that's still holding you back from it?
What's holding me back from it is simply lack of passage of time, learning and growth that I need to undergo. And that's going to be an ongoing process. Perhaps in my mind, I never truly will be successful because I will truly never cease growing and therefore never cease in my quest to truly optimize. But I'm a lot further along than I was all of those years where I was trying to be something else and not optimizing who and what I was meant to be, not optimizing, suppressing, if anything, or I would even say worse than suppressing, forgetting that I ever had the most fundamental gifts of all that I was given.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to much of what you said. I think for me, what success means is truly trying to be the best version of myself that I can be. And that comes in many different areas. I think that comes in respecting myself, respecting other people. That comes when being able to serve myself, serving other people. That comes in accountability, staying accountable to my words, to my actions. And I mean, look, do I get it right every time? Absolutely not. Do I get it right 9 times out of 10? Probably not. I think that the ratio there is a lot smaller, but I think what matters is I continue to try. I continue to put my best foot forward. I mean, are there days when I wake up and I don't get to the to-do list? Absolutely.
Oh, I'm so glad to know that. Sometimes I think I'm the only one. Sometimes I look at that to-do list and I'm like, oh, I am such a failure.
Yeah.
I didn't even get past number 1. Thank you so much. Seriously, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I think there are different circumstances that come, as I was sharing with you earlier. Yesterday, I got the second vaccine, and yesterday it wasn't bad. Like, I got it and my arm was fine and I was still able to go on with my day. And then this morning I woke up and I was like, I can't do this. Like, there's the headache was just like through the roof. I mean, I woke up with like a 10 out of 10 headache.
Wow.
And it just got progressively higher and higher.
Oh my.
And so I realized it's like, okay, this is a day that I have to take slowly. So if I don't get to everything that I wanted to do the night before, so I don't know how you do this, but with my to-do list, I write them out the night before. I don't know the impact that has. I just heard that however many years ago by now I've been doing this. When I write them the night before, I think in a way I'm kind of preparing my brain to take on the day the following morning.
Yeah, maybe you sleep on it and have some dreams that can illuminate things or
Exactly.
just process. What a good idea.
Exactly. And I think the brain also just probably makes connections that I'm not able to when I'm conscious, as far as how to achieve some of those things. But I found that to be a very interesting reflection for me, because I think far too often I believed in this concept that in order to be more, you had to do more. And I think the whole concept of human being, it became a lot more about human doing. And that was what the success, that was what the version of it, at least the early stages. I thought that I truly had to do more in order to be successful, in order to be more.
Yeah.
So I had to make more money. I had to do more of this. I had to do more of that. And then I started to realize that even though there might be value in that particular stage of life, I don't think it's always about the doing. I think there's probably a healthy combination of the two. I don't know what it is. I think you just know once. It's one of those moments, maybe once you know. But I've started to realize that throughout the week, it's not always about doing. There are times when it's okay to do nothing. That's actually one of the hardest things for me to do. And I think part of it has to do with this whole concept of success, And
Yes.
the other challenge I've experienced is being surrounded by people who view success differently. And I'm not saying that one views it any better than the other. They just have different variations of it. In being surrounded by individuals who solely look at success as a way to generate as much wealth or money as they can, it's a challenge to break away from that thought, especially if it's someone who is in your immediate circle, someone that you keep in touch with. Because it's one thing to recognize that, okay, their version of success can be different from mine,
Yes.
but they still influence you.
Yes.
They still influence your actions. They still influence your behaviors. And so breaking away from that pattern, it takes time. And I haven't forgotten this conversation I was having it with my cousin, where she had said something and it was just so simple. She said that one day a week, she literally tries to do nothing, but she also tells herself during that day that even though she's doing nothing, she's still moving forward.
Yes.
Towards her goals and aspirations.
Yeah.
And I remember at first hearing that and I was like, okay, you're full of shit. Like, how can that be true? If nothing off the checklist gets accomplished, how can you be moving forward? And she explained that it was in recharging her battery and taking the time to reflect and really understand that, is what she's doing productive? And if so, how is it really serving her moving forward? And how is it serving that future version of quote unquote success that she's aspiring for? So that's a challenge for me. I know you do the same thing once a week.
Yes.
Do nothing.
Yes.
I struggle with that. Like, if I haven't had a time where I haven't been able to do anything. And I think maybe that's just part of who I am. Like, even in situations where I'm not doing anything, I'm still either reading a book or I'm putting myself through some, I don't know, intense exercise, like paddle boarding on the river or whatever. I have a hard time just like being able to sit down and just not do anything for 8 to 10 hours straight.
Well, I will admit, in my case, I don't do nothing. I go to the gym, and on that day of the week, which is Saturday, in case anyone ever tries to reach out to me on Saturday, you won't hear from me. Oleg has made a valiant attempt before, and I know you've given up as well. Because sometimes we just have to say, I failed. I tried to reach him. I failed. But what I'm doing is I'm literally listening to music all day. So it's not totally nothing, but it does put my brain in a different space, allow me some time for clutter to get thrown out, or maybe some memories to be formed, or things to shift, or for me just to have the downtime so I could come back up. I don't know. I think that your cousin probably, I would agree with it. I am moving forward and doing that. I've never really thought about it that way. I have thought that I am giving myself the mental break I need so I don't go insane. And I guess if I go insane and end up, just full of rage because I'm stressed out or getting sick or ending up just not able to function, that would be stepping back, or at a minimum just holding in a single place. And I would consider that sort of outcome a failure as to some element of my professional and self-developmental process.
Do you think failure is inevitable? What is failure? Do you believe you fail? Do you personally fail in life?
Yes. I failed so many times. And I'm not ashamed to say, I dread the prospect of my life being a failure. It's possible that I won't know what failure looks like really until my dying moments. Sometimes I wonder about people. You read these stories about the regrets that people have on their dying bed. And we've discussed in a prior episode, I believe, that there is some question as to whether these deathbed regrets or reflections really are valid or not, for a number of different reasons, not the least of which is people who know that they're about to die or who are on their deathbed are not invested in the future. And so therefore their perspective may automatically shift simply because of that. That being said, I really would hope that my last few thoughts as I review my life were not ones of like, oh my God, what on earth did I do? I wonder, though, if some people do feel that way. The obvious example is Adolf Hitler, if he had time to think about it before he killed himself, or maybe tyrants who we might not know about in different eras, who, as they were going into that great night, looked back and they thought, oh, I killed all of these people or conquered all of these other countries or captured all of these prisoners or built all of these palaces, and no one cares about me.
Yeah.
Or I'm going away now, or people want me dead. They're excited about my life. What if I had given up a few of those palaces? Or maybe they're thinking, none of it matters. I'm about to die anyway. But to me, failure would be, I tend to view failure on a macro scale as looking back on my life as having wasted the opportunities to have done what was most important in whatever way I may ultimately define it at that stage in my life. I have felt on a more micro level failure many times. Many times. It might be small failures. There was a time when I, for instance, may have said, I'll get you an assignment by such and such time, and I have submitted it to a boss, and it was garbage.
Mm-hmm.
That's a failure. Or when someone has relied on me for something and I haven't come through. I've done that before. Mm-hmm. That's a failure. One of the biggest and most persistent failures in my life that I have become, I'm proud to say, much better at, but it was a pattern that I engaged in for far too long in my life, was not being fully accountable for my actions, being quick to blame others.
Yeah.
Well, I was a jerk to so-and-so at work. Yeah, well, she didn't deliver her assignment on time and I was going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
I could have easily held myself accountable. I didn't. I chose to blame her or my boss or circumstances. Those were failures, that tendency, that reactiveness, something that I look back on now with a lot of sadness because there was so much opportunity for myself that I ultimately deprived myself of. I might be where I'm at today. I might have been able to do that 10, 15 years ago if I hadn't failed repeatedly in holding myself accountable and then learning from my mistakes. Yes, in answer to your question, I have failed. I'll tell you, I'm sorry.
Do you seek recognition?
Yes, and I don't apologize for that.
What does recognition provide to you?
Recognition provides motivation. It provides proof to me that what I did matters or had some positive benefit to somebody. I don't know if no one ever acknowledges it. If I am driving a car beautifully, hello, Jessica, good to see you. It always makes us feel successful when you are in the room. If I am driving a car down an empty road,
right,
but secretly running it in the wrong gear or not running it with not enough oil in the engine or whatever, and I don't ever admit that I did that. I just park the car before any damage happens and then walk away. Or I don't know that I should have been maintaining the car. I'm in a far worse position than if I had been driving along with someone who actually knew something about cars and saying, oh, there's that red light on the dashboard. Oh, by the way, I haven't checked the oil in about 8 years. Is that something I should do something about? Right. I lose the opportunity to grow because of that. I lose the opportunity to also know that I'm doing the right thing if I am obsessing over the oil in the tank. If no one ever tells me, Scott, that's how you maintain a car, that's not how you drive it, then I don't know what not to do. But just as importantly, if no one ever says, Scott, you drove that car perfectly, Or Scott, I can't believe what a good job you did of maintaining this car. It's 10 years old, but it's running like it was only 6 months. Then I did helps me understand what I do successfully. I've got to have it.
Yeah.
Left to my own devices, I don't know about you or Jessica, but left to my own devices, I'll do anything. And half the time it's wrong unless someone tells me you did a good job.
Yeah. I think as you were sharing that, it made me think of my own perspective as it comes to, do I seek recognition in my life? And I think as I think about, there's value in seeking recognition for me because it validates an idea or a concept. Now, at the same time, I think there's also a fine line between how far am I willing to go to seek that recognition from an individual. If I'm solely, I was just thinking about some of the previous relationships I've been in, and when I was constantly seeking recognition in order to gain that validation from the individual, to validate whether or not the choices that I was making were the quote unquote correct ones, that became the danger. It became the danger because I was so dependent on the other individual to approve of my choices. And it went from higher level decision making to seeking that validation across every decision ever made. So I think that's the fine line that I chose to draw within that. For me, the difference now is, and I might have shared this with you or on one of the Saturday calls, I don't seek credit anymore as much, because I used to at the beginning. I used to seek credit. It was important for me to know that this was started by me, this was built by me, this was founded by me, and etc. Now it's not as important, because I've realized that yes, I might have been the one that started a particular project or idea, but due to feedback and collaboration from other people, it has become a combination of hundreds, if not thousands, of ideas. So that's where I think I've been able to redefine what it means to seek credit for a project. But I agree with you. I think recognition has a time and a place. Being able to understand that there is, that's kind of how you validate ideas to a degree. Right?
And also the good work that people have done. Nothing's worse, for instance, than when you read about an artist or an author or a singer or an architect who is underrated and under-recognized. People that know about this person say, oh my gosh, they were a genius. This was the best stuff ever. They poured their heart and soul into it. Meanwhile, someone that doesn't have any substance or isn't bringing anything new or original to the table or has no lasting influence at all is getting accolades left and right. I was in a really good seminar today, and it was about, among other things, marketing and branding.
Was it successful?
They were successful, absolutely. And at least one person in that room learned a lot and realized that there are things that I need to do better. That was a huge success. And it was a success for me to leave having invested my time and received that huge gift. But they pointed out there's a lot of people at the seminar that are like us. They're professional speakers. And they were pointing out that there are people that are famous, getting $50,000, $60,000 a speech, traveling around the world, who are saying things that are utterly trite, have no meaning, have no actionable anything. People forget about the minute they walk out the door. They aren't even that good as speakers, that bore the audience that's sitting there having that organization paid $50,000 for. And yet, because that individual might have been very successful or might have understood marketing and branding, or at least, and presumably had some luck along the way, been in a position to be out there more. Whereas, they also point out there are people that are speakers that are world-class talents, that have messages that really hit hard and that would transform huge populations of people if only they learned marketing, or if only they had a way to be able to get out in front of the world, sort of like the Aretha Franklins that are singing in the shower.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something very sad about that. And so the fact that we see those cases where people with substance, talent, drive, all of the ability to impact go unrecognized, while people that are vastly inferior in every conceivable respect except marketing get all of this acclaim and recognition, is evidence that we all understand that there is a common, almost like a justice that's related to acknowledgement and recognition of work that is well done.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because it makes me think that I think being a speaker, as well as other professions, freelance in general, it can be a challenging route, because there's so much to learn about that particular profession.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes,
skills are not always enough to be able to get you into the door or to even have a conversation.
Yeah.
So I can name you handful, if not hundreds, of people who are exceptional speakers, and they don't even need a script. Literally, give them a topic, give them this question of why do we strive for success, and they will just word vomit the next 3 hours the most profound thoughts that I would ever hear.
Yeah. Some of them have been special guests on this show, by the way.
Yeah. And it's interesting to look at. I look at people like that, but then at the same time, they might have that, but they don't have the other.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the digital, footprint or an image. They don't have they don't have the flashiest of websites. Some of them don't even have a website.
Yeah.
They don't have a way that someone can access their talent and look at their abilities as a speaker.
Yeah.
And so it really makes me think, as far as in building that quote unquote success around a profession, there's so many different hats that are required. So I know when I was starting, and I think you can relate, we didn't have the resources that we have right now.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the stuff we had to figure out on our own.
Yes.
We had to figure out how to build a website, how to do the branding, how to do logos, how to do all these different things.
Yeah. How to do StreamYard.
How to do StreamYard before we were able to get to this point. And I think there's something to be said about being engaged within that growth, something that you mentioned, and knowing that growth is going to be there at every step of the way. There's literally no end point. And which kind of puts success into a very interesting perspective. I mean, what is success if you're constantly focused on growth? Because everything is bound to evolve from one version to another. So whatever got you here may not be the same stuff that gets you there. Therefore, what does success look like at that point?
It's interesting that you say that, because that goes as to one of the challenges I had with my business partner when he and I were in a business partnership. As you know, I am extraordinarily growth-minded. And speaking of lenses that we put on ourselves, I would be the first to confess that a lens through which I view my own success is growth-oriented, whether it is growth in revenue, growth in, as you said, digital footprint or public presence, growth in the ability for me to project my voice as one that is able to be heard amidst the cacophony of noise out there, growth related to business revenue, staff size, all of the sorts of traditional metrics that are associated with business success. My business partner was not as enamored with those things. He wasn't. And he has that right. I do not begrudge him that. It ultimately led to, and I have an intense drive, because of that drive I mentioned earlier, to be enormously successful. I have that drive to push for growth. Perhaps he would say at all costs.
Yeah.
He would probably say he views things from a more balanced perspective. He wants to be able to do martial arts at night. He wants to be able to hang out on weekends with his family or his buddies. He wants to be able to listen to music. He wants to be able to sleep when he wants to sleep, or have time to draw cool pictures. She's a very talented artist. And to be growing, and not being able to do any of those things, I bet he would say would mark him as a failure. And that means that at least vis-a-vis business growth, he did not correlate growth to success.
Yeah.
Especially, and he would have viewed perhaps the sort of growth that I was driven to take this company to as a harbinger of failure.
Yeah. And look, you pointed this out, I think, last week when we were having a conversation with Casey on the other podcast. You were talking about this whole concept of work. I mean, there is a lot of truth to be said behind, in order to achieve one's goals, there's a lot of work that comes behind it. Now, whether it's necessarily hard work or whatever you want to put in front of that work, I think that's the thing that varies. But in common, it's work, a lot of work. And we are here sitting, and why we are in a position that we are today. I mean, for me, I look at all this, it's taken me 5 years. 5 years to get to this point.
Yeah.
Of
starting. And I personally will attest to your work ethic. I've seen it in action.
Where it goes or anything. So I think there is something to be said about acknowledging the fact that, yes, everyone does have their own journey, and everyone has their own goals, and that's perfectly fine. But the reality of the matter is, I think, in my opinion, in order to be able to really step into those goals and really achieve the wildest dreams and aspirations, it takes some serious work, and it takes serious times of being able to fall down, get back up. I think that phrase, fall down 7, get up 8, I think there's a lot of truth there, because it can get as challenging as that.
So do you believe that it's possible to be successful without work?
No, I don't believe so. I think work is, I think it's a huge component to it. I think it is possible to tell myself that I'm successful, but no, that doesn't make sense. It has to involve work. It has to involve an element of determination, persistence, perseverance, the drive. Now, there's also, I think, I don't know if you've ever experienced this or anyone that's listening, drive is an interesting element that I've looked or analyzed recently, and that's there's a danger to being too driven.
How on earth is that possible? What are you talking about?
I think there's a danger being too driven. For me, what I've seen is that in moments where I was solely focused on achieving a particular goal or objective, I left some other things in the back burner.
What? What does it matter?
It matters. It matters if it matters to you. So for me, relationships have been a huge component of who I am for however long. And so being so laser focused on achieving a particular goal at hand, I lost track of time to be able to pick up the phone and call or text or email people who are important in my life. And I think that's one of the dangers of being too driven is I get so ingrained into the project or the work at hand that I forget about some of these other things, which in my opinion are more important. For me, it's more important to maintain a healthy relationship and a transformative relationship with someone rather than being able to achieve a specific goal or outcome.
Do you like to work?
I have mixed feelings on that now. I like to work. So when I was first starting much of this 5 years ago, I think one of the best ways that anyone could describe me was a workaholic. I loved to work. I'm talking about I can work on a project for 12 hours straight with no food or water. But I think a lot of that also goes back to what are you doing as that work? So I'll give you an example. I love to design. I could spend 12 hours on Canva and not lift my eyes off the laptop. But that's just because I like the concept of design. I like when things look visually appealing. I struggle in seeing things that aren't designed well, because I think design is a huge component of organization. And so when something is not designed well, my immediate assumption that I make is it's not organized.
Is that why you always are telling me I'll handle the design, Scott?
It's part of the reason. Yes.
We could laugh about it.
It's part of the reason. But I think what's also important within that is now at this particular stage of my life, I'm realizing that there is a balance between, I'm not going to say work-life balance. I don't necessarily believe in that. I think they're too interconnected to be able to define a line between the two. But I think there is a balance between working all the time and then choosing to take some time to do other things that are not necessarily that same work related. So choosing to pick up the phone and have a conversation with my friend, choosing to go spend some time in the gym, on the river, wherever it is, take the dog for a walk. Yes, those are all elements of work, but I think it's a different type of work than being able to do like one thing for however many hours. Do you like to work?
I love to work.
Yeah.
Interestingly,
Could you work the whole day if you didn't have?
Yeah, if I didn't have things like tiredness or food or things like that. Absolutely. And I happily would. My husband went on a trip to see his family in March. And we both, we'd been together in this studio apartment together, as everyone knows, 24/7 since the lockdown began. So we both felt it was okay for us to take a week-long break from each other. We still somehow would manage to be in touch. And we'd seen, quite enough of each other for a while and could handle a little bit of a break. But some of this was, we just needed to get away from the apartment. Or he needed to get away from the apartment. And we talked about it. And he said, Scott, if I'm gone, you'll be able to work from the minute you get up to night, and you won't have to worry about me wanting to chit chat or any of that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, that's going to be incredible. And that's kind of what I did outside of going to the gym and going on my hour-long walks. I did. I got up, I worked till 11:30 or so at night, like I do every night. But the difference is, outside of just maybe 15 minutes here or there for food, I went back to work. I loved it. And I think that sometimes it's been and I really have tried to pull away from this. And say to myself, it's unfair for me I acknowledge that and I do believe it takes a huge amount of just work to be able to succeed. But I also sometimes suspect, or at least wonder, if perhaps people like me have an advantage when it comes to an unfair advantage when it comes to work, because I like to work. I like to work, particularly if it is something that I believe furthers my mission, why I'm here. Now, when I first got out of law school, I initially went into government because I had heard about what it was like at these huge law firms where they worked 15-hour days and would call you and make you cancel vacations and things like that. And that was not for me. And some of that was because I didn't like legal work itself on a fundamental level. I viewed it as something I needed to do in order to further my goals of getting the success that I was seeking at the time. But that evaporated quickly, because at the end of the day, I needed to get the work done that needed to be done in order to be successful, even as a junior lawyer. But on some level, I even liked to work. And I might not have been the type of work that I was dreaming and fantasizing about doing. And I thought it was boring and annoying and destructive and all this sort of stuff, but it still was work. So I had no hesitation. There were times, and I actually have a physical injury because of this tendency of mine. There was one time I worked 36 hours straight. I didn't care. And then got up, slept for 2 hours, got back, went back to the office. And that was fine. I was down with that. And so that is, I feel, one big caveat. There are certain people, and I understand this as someone living it, that like to work. Not everyone likes to work. Some people just don't like, and I might have at a younger point in my life judged them as lazy or people that just didn't have what it takes or all these other self-righteous sort of things. Part of the mental games I like to play to feed my ego sometimes, I'm really worked out of this, is to look at other people and say, oh, you're lazy. I'll show you what work is. That's ego bullshit on my end.
Yeah.
What is true, though, is that I like to work irrespective of whether anyone else does. What I also believe is true is some people don't like to, and that may be just who they are. And there's nothing to judge about that. They're people that in many ways are going to be successful in ways that I can never even imagine.
Do you think you were born with a work ethic, or is that something that you developed over time?
I developed it. I believed I had it dispositionally, but it was developed. My father was in the military, as we've shared before. I don't know if we've shared it on the show or not, but he had and my mother too, to some extent, but especially my father had very specific expectations as to what the role of a boy in the house was. And that was to do work, especially the hard work. Oh, yes. So my sister's chores were to clean a room somewhat, and then to rinse off the dishes and put them in the dishwasher. That was that wasn't that she was lazy or anything. That was just, she just had different expectations for herself. Yeah. Mine ultimately became to clean the living room. And I think she had some minor kitchen cleaning responsibilities, but not really. Empty the trash, shovel the snow, mow the lawn, make sure my room was clean, take care of the dog shit, a whole other, all this, that, and the other every time I turn around. And that was, and they left me time for play. So I don't want to be, make it seem like they were tyrants, but I was, and to get my homework done. Yeah. And yes, I was checked on about that until I was old enough where they trusted me and they just knew I would do it. But yeah, I was expected to work. And if I did not work, my allowance was withheld and I was punished. And so beyond a certain age, it was a habit. Maybe over time, that habit was twisted into enjoyment. Who knows?
Was getting into Columbia the ultimate version of success?
No, I viewed it as a failure at the time.
Really?
Yep. I applied to Yale and Stanford, got on their waiting lists. I was mad. I viewed myself as a failure. All a matter of perspective.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was recently doing, I think I was watching a couple of things and reading some articles about people being able to pay their way into school. And it brought up a really interesting question though, as far as the value of some of these prestigious universities, the value of a university in general, and how that alone could determine one's version of success or failure, getting into it or being waitlisted or being rejected, and how that could impact one's trajectory moving forward. I was thinking about when you start talking about work ethic and having certain elements of it that you've developed over time. I've been curious about this for a while because I find myself in similar shoes, that I think for me, work just comes natural. I don't even think about it. I actually like to do work, especially work that's labor intensive. Every time I go back home to Michigan, one of my really good friends back there, he has a lawn mowing, snow shoveling business. And I know that, yes, I could sit at home and do work through my laptop and probably make significantly more on an hourly basis than if I were to go and do a single driveway for $30 or $40, which takes, way longer than an hour sometimes, depending on the snowfall. But I like doing that stuff because it helps me gain greater appreciation for that line of work and just working in general, having the ability to do those things and further develop the work ethic. And I think just elements of communication, and there's so many other things that come from it. But there's something to be said about it, that including that as my daily to-do or daily activity, I mean, it does bring me more fulfillment. I will say that.
Yeah.
In knowing that I have a work ethic and knowing that I actually can do the things that I aspire for.
Yeah.
It brings me fulfillment.
When I worked for the government, I always knew Now, there may have been other people out there, I just didn't know them, that no one could outwork me. I always knew that if I were to ever get fired, it certainly wouldn't be because of not getting work done.
Yeah.
And I also knew that no one could, in good conscience and with any credibility, point a finger at me and say I was some lazy government employee. Someone who has occasionally participated in this show by the name of Robert Van Pelt worked for me when I worked for the city. And I will say he was the only person I worked with. Well, I shouldn't say. He's one person that I worked with that could match me. Yeah. I don't know that either he or I would say we would actually beat each other with work ethic, but I will never forget one day I called him at 6:30 after he put in a very, very full day of work. He was driving home and I told him, I need you to do something. And he turned that car right around and came back to that office and stayed with me working with me until 3:30 at night. Jeez. And we were laughing. We had a lot of, he didn't complain once.
Yeah.
It was 4:00 in the morning before I got home. I think we were sort of delirious in the car, driving and cracking jokes and stuff like that. That's the one person that if I had ever been afraid might outcompete me for work ethic, it might have been him. You know, there is something fulfilling about that too. And I will also say this. When I worked in the nonprofit sector, one time I worked for 21 days straight. 2 weekends full. And I put in full days, both weekends, both days. And one of the days that I put in a full day was Easter. And I walked in that Easter Sunday and looked at the building check sign-in list, and I was the first person signed in. And then that night, before I rode my bike home, I looked at that roster, and I was the only person that had signed in that day, and I was the only person signing out. And the boss I had came up to me later and he said, I don't think you're fully committed to the job, Scott. And when I told my colleagues about that, they universally said, that's ridiculous. It was known that I had the heart among my peers, that I had the strongest work ethic there. I think some of them were like, we don't want that sort of work ethic. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So, so there was that situation where someone accuses you, right? Like after you've worked 21 days straight, including Easter, which is a holiday that, yes, I do celebrate, that, to be said, oh, you're not fully committed to the job. It is a little hard to take. But also I was in a position, I knew that because I prided myself on the work ethic so much. And I knew that I wasn't just pride, that I backed it up. So it wasn't even like I was offended. I thought it was ridiculous. I was angry about it. I wasn't like, though, for a second, I was like, oh, maybe I'm not working hard enough.
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
What do you feel like you sacrifice when you work so hard?
The only time I've really regretted working hard, and this is a story that fortunately has never been held over my head. And this person didn't express any frustration with me about it because this person knows who I am. But I worked with the city's Department for the Aging. And we were rolling out a major institutional reform that changed the way the city handled its Meals on Wheels programs. And there were executives that were assigned to the various providers to be there helping them out should there be any problems with the new version of the program that we had. And I was assigned to a provider that was very, very challenged with the rollout of this new initiative. And so on my husband's 50th birthday, I was at this provider until 11 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. Now, I was in touch with my husband the whole time, and he was mellow about it. He was like, a birthday is just a day. Don't worry about it. We can celebrate over the weekend. I know you'll find time for me. I know you have to be there. You wouldn't, this, that, and the other. And he really has never been nasty about it later. He never raised it once again. But it's something that when you ask that question, that's the one time I will say, I sacrificed something that to me was too far. My husband only turned a half a century. Even if he didn't care, he needed me to show I believe it was my obligation as someone who loves another human being to show them that I care and wanted to honor that very, very special day, especially with him who is such a beautiful and special human being. And so that's the one time I think I've missed something. Generally, when I weigh the opportunity cost associated with not working, whatever else it is to me does not have the same appeal usually. So I don't feel like really on balance I'm losing anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I get curious about that sometimes as far as what am I sacrificing when I do choose to work what are considered to be extensive hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it is probably some of those friendships and relationships that I have. But at the same time, it's kind of who I think that's where kind of making it full circle as far as what does success look like for you in your own life. For me, success is that combination. It's being able to work hard, but at the same time acknowledge the time that I spend with other people who are close to me. And sometimes I spend a whole day with them and don't get a single thing off the checklist. Well, it's a day well spent because I was still able to do the things that help me be the best version of myself.
But the other thing, Oleg, is that you and I are both hyper ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
And we both have very extensive visions for the enterprises that we are involved in.
Yeah.
And so that may also play into this. I am willing to sacrifice a massive amount for the fulfillment of that vision.
Yeah.
And others may have a vision that looks very different. Their vision may be, for instance, to be the best mother or father to their children that they can be. And so working harder, first of all, they're doing a different sort of work just in committing to child rearing at that level.
Yeah.
But second, their vision as to what professional related work might mean is radically different than ours. If that's their vision. And therefore, for them to sacrifice what someone like me would sacrifice in a heartbeat would be a sign, and I think a rightful sign, of profound failure, because their children would be without them, or maybe that loved one that needs them, or maybe their husband or wife has, or spouse or whatever, has needs. I'm lucky my husband is extremely secure about the relationship. He also likes having me around, and we like talking, and we like being around each other, and we have a good time, and we couldn't imagine our lives without each other. But he's not particularly needing a specific amount of time as much as he is needing, in my opinion, my attention when we're there, and affirmation and appreciation and focus. Right when we're on vacation, for instance, he's not as laissez-faire about my work ethic. If we're not able to see those sites that we traveled 3,000 miles to be able to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting line to understand. What is that fine line? What's the balance between the two in giving other people your time and attention and your energy, and then giving those things to the projects or the goals that you might have?
If your organization does not achieve what your vision is, it underperforms, let's be blunt. Or if mine underperforms, would you view me as a failure? Would you view yourself as a failure?
Being completely honest, I would not in either case. And I think the reason why is because I'm more interested in the person that you become. I'm more interested in the known and visible impact that you can have on yourself and other people. I think beyond that, some of the other goals and aspirations that the two of us might have for our visions and organizations, I mean, at the end of the day, if anything, they're dreams. They're the wildest dreams. And if I don't end up impacting knowingly 1 billion people, I'm not going to look at that as a failure, because I have been able to experience what it was like to impact one life, or even by this case, multiple people, including myself. So would I look at it as a failure? I don't think so.
Are you ever happy to see someone fail?
Am I ever happy to see someone fail? No, I'm not, because I think failure carries a negative connotation with it. I think, in my opinion, failure oftentimes is misunderstood. I think failure is perceived as kind of the end of the road or the worst thing in the world, when the reality, I think, failure, like as I said earlier, I think it's just a mistake. It's an opportunity to change course, to do something different, to try something over again, whether it's the same exact way or a different approach. So I'm never happy when I see someone fail. I think if anything, I maybe am a little bit, I don't know if sad is the right word, that failure is not looked as just another step along the journey.
In the 80s or 90s, I don't remember which, there was a man named Joel Rifkin. Joel Rifkin was arrested, put in jail, ultimately convicted for many lifetimes for being the perpetrator of what I believe was at that time the largest number of victims that had succumbed due to the actions of a serial killer, and he was the serial killer.
Right.
And there was never any real dispute about it. He may have even confessed at some point. And he was in jail for a few years of his multiple lifetimes of sentences, which he would never conceivably fulfill unless they found a cure to mortality and gave it to him just to torture him. And he was beat up by some other prisoners. If I remember correctly, he was killed by having his head smashed against one of the prison toilets. And he died at a young age. He didn't live to be 80 and then was beat up at that point. He was still in something approaching the prime of his life.
Yeah.
And I was talking to someone I know about this, and I said, when you read that sort of news, because I was feeling tumult inside for whatever reason when I read that, I said, why do you feel when you read that sort of news? And this person said, I feel sad. I said, why do you feel sad? Because, he didn't say, and I don't want to interpret my own internal tumult around this either this way, as feeling sorry for him.
Yeah.
But he felt, and I could relate to this, an existential sadness. Because this was a person whose life, at least arguably, I would say it's a pretty strong argument, and I don't know who would disagree with it, was a waste. Maybe it wasn't in some cosmic sense, but at least to all available human perception, it was a waste. He killed dozens of people whose lives could have had so much potential.
Right.
And then lived this schlubby, depressing life in prison where he didn't ever attempt to, and let's just say, at best, although he may not have perceived his murders as making a mistake, from any sort of reasonable, moral, or ethical standpoint, killing people for no reason is a pretty damn big mistake.
Right.
And he never made any attempt, by all accounts, to recover from his mistakes or make amends or anything. Instead, he just ended up with his head bashed in on a prison toilet. Sad. 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 To me, that was a life that might conceivably, let's forget about, which we should not forget. I want to restate that. I don't want to forget about the lives that he took and the potential that were lost. That's incalculable.
Right.
But what if this person had not killed them? Who knows also the multiplying effect if he had been able to, or had chosen to, or whatever he needed to do to not take those lives. He might have touched someone in a way, or many people in a way that was positive.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like my friend, when they said this, was discussing an existential sadness, a sadness that there was a life that achieved overwhelmingly negative in terms of what his contribution, his footprint was on this planet, that snuffed out so much potential, and that himself had potential that who knows what could have happened. Is that sort of person someone that you might consider a failure? Because that's maybe what's sad about it to me, that this is a person whose life, to my eyes, was irredeemable, was a failure.
Yeah.
I don't see any other way to describe what that person was. I don't see how anyone could say anything was successful about it.
So I think a couple of things that come to mind is, first, I feel like I'm really in no position to make a judgment on his life and whether or not it was success or failure or whatever. I look at his life and I choose to look at an individual who did a set of actions that I don't want to repeat personally. So for me, it's like it doesn't align with how I view humanity or other human beings. So if anything, it's a great learning opportunity of what not to do. But it brings up another question, and that is, do you believe that you need the light in order to see the dark? Or do you believe that you need the darkness in order to see the light? So if anything, it's like in looking at situations like that, and I'm by no means saying that, we need more people who take other people's lives or anything like that. But having that contrast, it allows people like you and I to understand what not to do and how not to behave. I mean, if we didn't have an example like his life, and once again, I'm not saying that there's.
I understand, and I'd have your back.
I'm wondering if it's like, to a degree, individuals' lives, and I don't know how they process it. I don't know if people like that, or as you mentioned earlier, like Hitler or whoever else that chooses to go to the very extreme situations, maybe that's the example that they're wanting to leave behind. So I don't know, and not necessarily so that other people can know differently, but more so, is it possible to look at a situation like that and say, okay, I'm not going to commit the same actions, but at the same time, it helps me see what not to do. So I guess what I'm saying is it possible to look at a life like that and say that that life was of value? Yes, it took however many people's lives, and I don't side with those actions, but did it help me see differently? Did it help me see a point that I don't want to be, or I don't want to do? Because let's face it, for me, I don't know if this happens for you or anyone else, there are the dark times. I face dark times on my own, not necessarily to a point where I'm wanting to go, purchase a weapon or take out whatever out of my apartment and go kill other people. But I feel like there are the dark thoughts of, whether it's extreme anger or depression or stress, whatever, those are all part of the human experience. When someone doesn't do something that you ask them to do, and you have that rage within you, especially if it ends up being a big mistake. So if you have, I don't know, thousands of dollars worth or invested in a project, and someone messes up a step within that, and all of a sudden you've lost millions, thousands, billions of dollars. And that, I think it's okay to experience that anger. The difference is, what do you choose to do next? And in his case, I don't know. I'm not trying to defend him, but he might have been going through other things of his own and just didn't have the tools or the resources to be able to process the emotions that he was going through.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost say that, right, that's the other point, and maybe that's also the part of the sadness too.
Because it takes
presumably
courage.
He didn't,
It
right?
takes courage to be able to admit that there's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, think about us. Like, we don't choose, to do some of those actions, but still, we struggle with those concepts. We struggle with the concepts of being able to ask for help.
Yes.
We struggle with the concepts of being able to develop the courage and say, hey, I'm striving for this version of success, but like, my actions are not aligning.
Yeah.
That's a personal struggle we go through.
Yeah.
So
imagine if the struggle was something so much greater.
Exactly. And imagine if there were other variables involved, such as you literally have to go make whatever amount. You have to go rob a bank in order to feed your family. That's why there's something that you pointed out throughout this conversation that I found interesting, because I have been that, and I am still that to a degree. I'm quick to judge. I've gotten better, over the years where now I take a step back and reflect. But before that, I was very quick to judge.
Yeah.
You know, someone did something wrong. I'm like, well, I have immediate, just boom, 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 a line set of judgments that I made against that person, when the reality of the matter is I didn't fully know what they were going through.
Mm-hmm.
What if they had a tough day?
Mm-hmm.
What if their day was even more challenging than mine was?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I sitting here judging someone else's
Mm-hmm.
actions when the reality of the matter is I never fully know their story?
In my case, judgment is something that, or judgmentalism is something I'm aggressively working on.
Yeah.
I do feel I've gotten better at it. Some of it is rooted, in my opinion, in just habit. And it's an intellectually easy way to distance myself from the discomfort that those actions or that person's behavior might cause within me, or to distance myself from the possibility that I would do similar things.
Yeah.
Particularly if they're the sort of things I could or would do, I just don't for whatever reason, like whatever.
Yeah.
But then there is also a part of it where I have come to realize that judgment also gives you, well, not you, but it can give me
Mm-hmm.
something else which is far more insidious, and that upon recognizing it, fortunately, I can't unrecognize.
Yeah.
Which is a sense of superiority, an ego feed.
Yeah.
I'm better than them because I would never do that sort of behavior without ever bothering to think I'm not them. I've never seen the world through their eyes. Like you just said, I don't know what they're going through. I don't know what their brain chemistry is. I don't know what their body makeup is. I don't know what their family was like. I don't know what genetic issues that they might have inherited from their family. I don't know what environmental things they might have endured at a young age or not have endured, what sort of opportunities they may have had or not have had, or how they, like you said, how they were feeling that day. They could have a disease that I might not know about. Anything could be going on. And rather than delving into that and reaching out to at least see whether there's a space for compassion or empathy, which is hard, which makes us feel vulnerable, which faces us with our own weakness, it can be easier to just sit back and feel better about myself because I wouldn't do something that other low life would do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's something else within that you just said. A friend of mine recently helped me recognize, we're having a conversation. He said, if I haven't disappointed you, just wait. And I thought it was so interesting the way that he pointed that, because disappointment or not meeting someone else's expectations or assumptions, I mean, it literally is, it's inevitable. Because I always have, not always a long time, but sometimes I have a higher standard for what I respect as a response. And if the person doesn't deliver that, then I'm sitting there in disappointment. I'm sitting there in frustration and stress and anxiety and all these other things. And sometimes I just have to remind myself that, hey, whatever it is that I expect, the other person may not want the same thing, and that's okay. We all, I think, if talking from we all have different things that we aspire for. I think that's a given. Even though it might be the same object of wanting, I don't know, a car, a house, whatever. How are you going to get to it? And the version that you want and the specifics of it is probably different from the next in line. And I think that's okay. And I think the same thing applies to this version of success. It's that your version of success can be different from my version of success, and that's fine.
Speaking of success,
you
have 2 podcasts that have been one of which has been running for quite a while and has had a series of outstanding guests. Not the least of which is me, but I'm not going to brag about that. A lot of them really are people that have been transformative in the impact that they've had on lives of the others, of other people. And then the other one is newer, but it's already making an impact vis-a-vis the quality of the conversations that it's bringing to the fore and the unusual work that many of the guests are doing that's really positively impacting the world. Can you talk to us a little bit about those shows?
Yeah, first one is called Overcoming Odds. And then that's the organization you're a part of as well.
I am.
Where really I think the best way that I could describe what it's all about is it's a platform for people to be able to demonstrate their strengths, their uniquenesses to the world. And how I think we do much of that work is through that story, reframing that narrative, helping people understand that despite of all the adversities and challenges, there's still a light at the end of the tunnel. There's still lessons and takeaways that can be learned. And so that show, I think I've had it probably for going on to 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years. It's been a while. It's been quite the journey to do that. And then the other one I started, which you were a guest on as well, called The Power of Your Story. I'm a huge believer in the story. I think, in my opinion, everything starts with the story. Whether, I think it was Henry Ford, I always go back to his quote, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. And I think the part of that depends on the story that you choose to tell yourself. Whether you think you can do it or whether you think you can't, you're going to be right in both instances, because that's where you put your attention into. So those are two shows that I'm doing. I'm really happy with how they're going because of what you just said, the quality of the conversations and the relationships, and the people that really make it happen. And I know you have a similar thing that talks about the concepts of purpose and finding meaning within life and adversity. And you have very similar set of guests that we have on ours.
Scott Mason's Purpose Highway podcast, purposehighway.com, tells the stories of entrepreneurs, thought leaders, influencers, great thinkers who have found a way to connect to their higher purpose to build a better self and a better world. These stories are powerful. They need to be shared. And I hope that anyone who is watching the show or listens gives it a shot, because they will be inspired. If, by the way, you like this show tonight, leave a review on Facebook for us or on LinkedIn, and come back again. Tell your friends about it. Forward one of our promo pieces to people that you know. We would love to have you engaging with us. We want to hear your thoughts. This is about your thinking. This is about your contribution. This is about opening your minds. Adam, thank you so much for that remark. I could not agree more. Jessica, it was good to see you tonight. And anyone else out there who was listening or who's going to listen or watch the recorded versions of these later, and I know folks do because I've gotten feedback from them. Thank you so much. Oleg, what do you have to say before we close out?
I think this was a great success to have this show, and I couldn't agree with you more that I think although you and I are the ones that start the conversation, what really makes the difference are the people that choose to be a part of it and the ones that share their perspectives. And at the end of the day, help us realize that there's only so much that we know in the world, and there's so much that we don't know, and there's so much more that we can learn and know more about. So everyone that's always a part of it, Jessica, Adam, and Caleb, and so many other people, those
Richard
are the
marked this
individuals
earlier,
that really make this space special.
With that, have a good night.